The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
A Michigan judge ruled last week that children do not have a fundamental right to learn how to read and write. This according to the Detroit Free Press. In a case that was watched, quote, reading from the article, the ruling came in a federal lawsuit that was closely watched across the U.S. because of its potential impact. Filed on behalf of Detroit students, it sought to hold a dozen state officials, including Governor Rick Snyder, accountable for what plaintiffs said were systemic failures that deprived Detroit children of their right to literacy. In his ruling, the judge said plainly literacy and the opportunity to obtain it is of incalculable importance. Murphy wrote, as plaintiffs point out, voting, participating meaningfully in civic life, and accessing justice required some measure of literacy. This portion is according to The Hill. They said, quote, but he concluded that those points, quote, do not necessarily make access to literacy a fundamental right, adding that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that in the past that the importance of a service does not, quote, does not determine whether it must be regarded as fundamental. So before I even let me give you a little bit more from the Detroit Free Press. For context, they said, quote, a similar lawsuit claim was made in so-called, quote, right to read litigation the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan filed in 2012, alleging Highland Park students had been denied a benefit guaranteed under Michigan's Constitution. That constitutional provision states that the, quote, means of education shall forever be encouraged and the legislature shall maintain and support a system of free elementary and secondary schools. But the Michigan Court of Appeals dismissed that lawsuit in 2014, saying, quote, the cited provisions of the Michigan Constitution require only that the legislature provide for and finance a system of free public schools. The Michigan Constitution leaves the actual intricacies of the delivery of specific educational services to the local school districts. The ACLU appealed to the Michigan Supreme Court, which opted not to hear the case. So in other words, a similar case to this one, the court said that, you know, you have the right to go to school, but you don't actually have the right to get an education or learn, so long as these buildings are erected and so long as you are at school and you're forced to go to school, right? Truancy laws. If you're not in school, then your parents can be charged, but you can't actually claim to have a right to an actual education, to literacy. And this, to me, is a very important case because it really rips the veil away from the type of America that a portion of America is comfortable with. And you also have to keep in mind that this is the same Michigan in which the city of Flint doesn't really believe that citizens have a fundamental right to clean water. The judge in this case, Stephen Murphy III, has been on the bench since he was appointed by George W. Bush in 2008. And my instinct is to say conservatives. This is what conservatives do. And that's true, but in a very specific way. And I don't want to oversimplify it. I want to drill down on that because this is a fundamental disagreement, an ideological disagreement in terms of what the government's responsibility to the people is. What is that responsibility? What does it look like? Does it grow or does it remain the same as what the founders believed when they wrote the Constitution? And plenty of conservatives use the excuse of being originalist or constitutionalist and as a means of justifying the limiting of rights instead of the expansion of rights. I mean, that's quite literally one of the fundamental divides between being a progressive and a conservative. If you get rid of all of the bumper sticker talking points, if you get rid of all of the hyper sensationalization that occurs in conservative propaganda media, in the Ben Shapiro's and the Rush Limbaughs of the world, I see them as the same, just different presentation formats. But if you get rid of all of the propaganda and you cut to the core of the differences between conservatives and progressives, it is the fundamental belief of what the government owes its people. And this is an extreme example to now where we're seeing that there's a belief that the government has no responsibility to the literacy of its people, that it is drawing. I mean, and this is why I think that this is as good a place as any to point out the fact that this government exists by virtue of the people. I mean, it exists by virtue of the taxation of the people and the consent of the governed. So it only makes sense that this government that exists by virtue of the consent of the governed and by virtue of the taxes that it draws from the people, that it has responsibilities to the people, and that we, the people, should be the ones determining what those responsibilities are. Conservatives, genuinely, if they could have their way, they would limit the responsibility of the government to being nothing more than defense. That's it. They would limit the scope of the government to being nothing more than our protection from foreign invaders, from domestic insurrections, and protecting our borders, and that would be it. It reminds me of the saying, the quote from the XYZ affair, Robert Harper, where he said millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. Now, that's out of context. He was talking about no tribute to France. However, the mindset has set in. That mindset has set into conservative ideology. Millions for defense, but not 1 cent for anything more. That's the mindset. And this decision by the judge in Michigan really represents that type of mentality with regards to what responsibility the government has to the people and what constitutes a fundamental right. Now, generally speaking of conservatives, will obviously twist what an individual has a right to, as long as it nicely and neatly comports to conservative ideologies, right? And modern conservative ideologies, because it's inconsistent with true conservative thought throughout American history. But they will twist things and suggest that, oh yes, a fetus has the right to life, right? But now a child, a living, breathing child who was here on the earth, doesn't have the right to an education, to reading and writing, to learn reading and writing. The government has no responsibility there. And the only responsibility, to correct myself slightly, is what the Supreme Court already decided, is that they have the responsibility, at least the Michigan Supreme Court that I cited earlier, they have the responsibility to erect schools, but not to any certain level of education. Now, to grossly generalize, this is the future that conservatives want. This is the future that libertarians want. They want a future where there is a shell of a government that only provides defense from foreign invaders, but also defense from the measly peasants, the scum, the leftist scum of the earth that would actually demand that the government, who derives its power from us, conservatives and libertarians want the government to protect them from people like us who say that since this government gets its power from us, then surely this government should serve us. And then we get into the conversation of taxation being theft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of the cliches and bumper stickers. That's when we get back, we move away from the actual divide to being the actual ideological differences to being nothing more than talking points that people memorized and bullet points and bumper sticker slogans that they recite on Twitter. But the reality is that the fundamental question is, what do we believe that the government owes us because of what the government takes from us? And it never seemed ridiculous. It never seemed far-fetched, even for conservatives in a previous era, to believe that the government had a fundamental responsibility to provide education and that children have a fundamental right to learn reading and writing, to literacy. And now a conservative-leaning judge appointed by George W. Bush Stephen Murphy III, says no, that's not the case. The government doesn't have any, or rather, the individual student doesn't have any fundamental right to literacy. Good job. Good job, America. Good job, conservatives, libertarians. This is the future that you want. And it is it's the perfect step towards completing our idiocracy. This is not, before I conclude, this is not to say that our education system is even worth saving. It is so antiquated. If you've ever taught, if the solutions that you're trying to bring in aren't the solutions to the problems that these kids are facing now, and they don't prepare them for anything more than to be a cog in the machine. So whereas our education system is already broken, already antiquated, already in need of desperate change to actually help children to educate them on more. And this is not a slam on teachers, because I was a teacher and I know the difficulty of being a teacher. I know the challenges, but at the core, our education system is just fundamentally flawed and structured to make nothing more than cogs in the machine. But talk about making a bad situation worse. This decision really is setting the stage to make a system that is already broken, in desperate need of repair, to make it even worse than it already is. I'm putting a little bit more in the preview, the public preview, not on a regular basis, just because I wanted to talk publicly about Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Cortez, and her win, but more specifically, the people who are losing their minds over her. The people who are they're scrambling. They being more than just conservatives. I've been just kind of observing over the last week since her win, because I believe it's a week to the day. I've been observing casually, and I noticed that you could really break down the people who are terrified or hate Cortez. AOC is she's so popular now, she just goes by her initials. One day I'll be known as BPD, but I digress. But no, seriously, there's 5 group of people. There's 5 types of people who actually are terrified and hate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Obviously, conservatives in general. And I'm talking about mainstream conservatives like Bill O'Reilly, like Glenn Beck. And I mention them too particularly because they're trying an approach that is smart. They're going about their attempt to destroy, because ultimately at the end of the day, they want to destroy her and they want to destroy what she stands for, which is democratic socialism, which is, let's be clear, democratic socialism is not Marxist-Leninism. It is not communism, right? Last week I mentioned that I was going to talk about how the one particular socialist party actually cannot stand. They hate the fact that she's being referred to as a socialist because she's not a quote unquote true socialist. But she's made it clear that she's a democratic socialist, and she is not a communist. She's not a Marxist Leninist. She's not looking for a revolution to actually overthrow the system and to replace it with an authoritarian left leaning government, whatever, fill in all the cliches that you want to fill in about communism. That she is not. She's not a revolutionary. She's a reformer. And as much as I disagree with Marxist-Leninists all the time, I'm sure they would agree with me there. She's not a revolutionary. But then she doesn't have to be a revolutionary. She's fundamentally just bringing basic changes, or really a renaissance, a throwback to Franklin Roosevelt's type of democratic socialism. So it's nothing revolutionary. And Bill O'Reilly, the reason I gave all of that before I discussed the Bill O'Reillys of the world who dislike her and the Glenn Becks who dislike her, is because their approach is far more insidious. They're trying to they understand that they cannot make her socialism scary. And I'm using socialism as a shorthand for democratic socialism, but you already know what I mean when I say socialism with regards to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They know they've been in the game long enough to realize that they can't make her scary. And so what they do is try to make her seem like a good person, but just wrong on policy or doesn't really know how the world works. The same play that they made with Obama, but Obama was a little easier to vilify because of his blackness. And so you have that group of mainstream conservatives who know that they can't make her the boogeyman, so they just make her look like they try to make her look like a little girl who doesn't know what she's doing. Right, that's group number. Group number 2, the Democratic establishment. I mean, Senator Tammy Duckworth came out with an article talking about how Ocasio-Cortez's politics won't work in the Midwest. Well, as you've seen everyone say over the weekend, if you've been on social media, your politics, Sammy Duckworth, and the politics of the Democratic establishment don't work in the Midwest. That's how you lost. That's how Donald Trump is president right now. But the reason that's the outcome. But the reason for their dislike of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is because she is the new face of the Democratic Party. She has gone, if you want to use Twitter numbers as a metric, which isn't good, but we still look at them. She went from like 50,000 people the other day to 500,000 today. In a week. She's been on every major platform. She's been on the Tonight Show. She's been on The View. She's been everywhere. She's been on a whirlwind tour, and she is the new face of the Democratic Party, which means the old vanguard is getting ready to get the boot. So for them, I don't think it's so much as a disagreement with her politics, which I know they fundamentally do disagree with her politics. It's more about controlling power and maintaining political power. Nobody likes when the new, young, fresh face comes in and kicks out the old folks. Well, just be more like Bernie Sanders, who has all the politics that the young folks like. But that's asking too much. So you have mainstream conservatives like Bill O'Reilly who dislike her and are smart enough to dismiss her as a young girl who doesn't really know what she's doing, but she's fundamentally, she's okay. She's not a villain. She just doesn't know what she's talking about. That's their play. Democratic establishment folks, they're trying to say, oh, her politics won't help us win, but that's the most easily dismissed because Democratic politics don't win. Establishment Democratic politics have not won. Then you have another group. You have the extreme Hillary supporters, the type that hate Bernie Sanders still to this day with the fire of 1 million suns. They with the fire of 1,000 suns is the actual phrase, but you know what I mean. They hate Bernie Sanders so much that anyone who is even tangentially connected to Bernie Sanders is now their enemy. Those are the type of people that you really only run into in social media. It's like 8% of the population, and I think that percentage is even getting smaller and smaller. But they are out there and they're trying to undermine Ocasio-Cortez because she's connected to Bernie Sanders. They're probably the least relevant in this conversation, but I noticed that group exists. All right, then you have celebrity conservatives. The Ben Shapiro's of the world, the Charlie Kirks of the world, the intellectual dark web. The so-called intellectual dark web. That's the other group that actually hates her. And you know why they hate her? They hate her because she is a direct threat to their bumper sticker conservatism, to the overly simplistic talking points that are wrapped in an intellectual veneer. They're laid waste to just simply who she is. And the thing about this, when I make a statement like that, this is not to say that Ocasio-Cortez is so magnanimous. She's merely a democratic socialist. This is the real power of the left. This is the power of democratic socialism. If it is amplified on a national stage at the same level as these ridiculous conservative so-called intellectual, but really they're just celebrities. If a democratic socialist is amplified at the same level that they are amplified, then all of a sudden, all of this conservative popularity and this conservative rock star, quote unquote rock star and ism, and this conservative celebrity is completely diminished. It pales in comparison to the light and to the shine that democratic socialism has and carries. Like, here's the thing. It's like they want to be rock stars. Cortez is actually a rock star in the political sense. They want what she is and what she has. And what she is and what she has is a result of, one, you know, her personality and her politics and her presentation. Yeah, for the alliteration. Okay, yeah. But also for her policy proposals. Even more alliteration. I'm sorry. But what she stands for, what she's fighting for, is something that resonates with people across the country. So you combine those policy platforms with her personality and the platform that she has now because she beat a 10-term incumbent. She is the rock star, and they are the losers that they have always been. There's one more group, but I'm out of time for the preview. So if you want to get the full episode, of course, go to patreon.com/the BPD show and become a patron today. Okay, let's fade this music out real quick. All right, if you're still here, that means you are a patron.